Hi everyone, I just wanted to make a video lecture of our final week of content since we are almost at the end of the quarter, and this final week of content is really more focused on you all making your own individual works of art. So obviously there will be parameters for this assignment and for your final assignment, which I'll talk about next week, but it's much more free than all the assignments that we've done prior to this one. So the big thing that I want you guys to focus on this week is using photo reference. This is a way that a lot of artists create a very complex work of art. It's not just going online, finding a photograph, and then copying it, which we've been doing a lot in this class. Instead, it is finding a variety of photo references, which you are either taking yourself or finding on Google or whatever, and then combining them into a complete work of art. So the best way to do this is through Surrealism. So Surrealism, they use a lot of collage in their work for everything from photography, where they were using literal collage, to their paintings and their drawings, where they were using a variety of photo reference and then kind of cobbling it together and then creating their super weird paintings. So I thought this would be a fun way to sort of explore the ideas of using photo reference in a way that you don't have to make it look super realistic and crazy. So Surrealism was an art movement. Also, sorry about the dog noises, but my dogs were sleeping all morning until I started recording this lecture, and so now you get a lovely soundtrack of dogs playing in the background. So Surrealism is an art movement. It was inspired by the works of Freud, the psychology works of Freud, where he studied a lot about dreams and the subconscious, and a bunch of artists and creative minds read his works and they got together and started to kind of create a manifesto of creating works of art or literature or music or cinematography that responded to and illustrated the unconscious mind. So there's a bunch of strategies that they used. They would mess around with scale. They would do kind of unconventional placement, like floating or putting objects in locations where they don't really belong. They would frequently use juxtaposition, which means that they were pairing unsimilar objects together, or even making them into, combining the two of them to make them into something super weird. Dislocation is very similar to the placement where they're placing objects in areas where they don't belong. Transparency, where they would make things like, walls or doorways transparent, not doorways, closed doors transparent into worlds that shouldn't be on the other side of those things. And then, of course, transformation, where they were just combining a whole bunch of photo reference objects to make like weird robot creatures. So we're going to look at what that means today. Scale just means the relationship of objects to each other and to their environment. So the surrealists tended to work a lot with scale. They would make objects either larger or smaller than they conventionally would be, and it tends to make a sort of trippy work of art. So this is the work of Rene Magritte. This is also the work of Rene Magritte, where he would make things significantly larger than they would be in the real world. One of the big things that he used here was also placement, because he would put these objects in places that would emphasize their unrealistic scale. So obviously, if he just had the glass and the brush and the comb up on a table, this wouldn't look like a weird still life. You'd be like, okay, cool, that's a glass and comb and brush, and there's no context for scale. But instead, he decided to place them in a bedroom, and he messed with the scale of all of these objects next to the bed and the wardrobe and then the room itself. Same with this apple. He blew up the apple quite a bit and made it the entire size of the room. So this is one of the ways that surrealists use scale. For those of you who are not already familiar with surrealism, obviously the most famous surrealist painting, arguably, is Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali. They did a parody of it in Looney Tunes. They did a parody of it in Animaniacs. There's a Simpsons one out there. I think there's a Rick and Morty one out there too. This painting has been repurposed and parodied a million times, and people have definitely, almost certainly seen it. A lot of people call it melting clocks, but it's actually called persistence of memory. He did do a whole series, though, of clocks being sort of warped and altered and melting, mostly to talk about time and its effects on our memory. Obviously, those of you who are younger probably haven't had the weird moments where you remember things totally wrong, but although you probably have had a few of those. But it gets worse as you get older because you'll have a conversation with a family member and you will both talk about the same situation that you were in, something that you shared, and you'll realize that you both remember it slightly or even dramatically different. And that's because memory does tend to warp things as you move forward through time. And he wanted to convey that in this painting. Salvador Dali was also really obsessed with eggs. He had a strange obsession with the idea of birth, and eggs are a really strong way to kind of create that metaphor. So you'll see a lot of eggs and a lot of sort of melty things in a lot of his work based on that. So like I mentioned before, placement is a great way to create a sort of surreal environment. A lot of times surrealists would place their horizon line really low to the canvas or to their paper, so that they had this sort of beautiful kind of empty sky. And then they'd usually have these large objects. This is also a big thing that Salvador Dali liked to do. He was heavily inspired by Giorgio de Chirico, who is arguably the father of Surrealism. A lot of his paintings are just really subtly surreal. Obviously, the Song of Love is not that subtle in its weirdness. But the one on the right and the one that we just looked at, those are a little bit more like, okay, something is off in this painting, but I can't quite place my finger on it. And that's because he was really inspired by how you wake up from a dream and you're like, okay, I was in the house where I grew up, but I wasn't. I can't figure out why, though. And so he tried to convey that sort of feeling in a lot of his paintings. He would also create multiple versions of the same painting and then mess with his collectors by selling a group of them almost the same painting, but he would change like one little thing, like maybe there'd be one figure right here instead of two, or maybe he would get rid of this little train in the background, or maybe her arm would be in a different position. And then all the collectors would realize it, months later when they went to each other's homes and they realized they had almost the same painting. And he thought it was hilarious. Another way to create that sort of feeling of surrealism and kind of things looking strange is to just kind of put them in a weird floaty environment, or even just make them float. The more subtle you make it, the more it'll kind of mess with the back of your mind without you immediately being able to recognize that things are amiss. This is a Japanese artist who is a contemporary one, and they create kind of modern day surrealism based on their society. Pretty crazy stuff. Really good painter. I'm gonna go back to this guy. So this is a great example of placement as well. So it's also using scale because the figure is gigantic and is the size of the building. It's also trying to escape from the building. It's very Alice in Wonderland-esque. But then there's all of these figures, which are all pretty much the same figure as well, but they're all kind of more of a normal scale. So the two of those paired together works really nicely to kind of mess with your head and really enhance how this whole thing looks. So not everybody does photorealism or really realistically rendered objects or figures in their surrealist paintings. Lenora Carrington, who was a contemporary of De Chirico and Dali and Frida Kahlo, she would do these sort of whimsical, almost like fantasy type paintings. She would do a lot of combinations of human figures with animals, and then just kind of strange placement of like clouds in the interior or these little pearl bubble things. Lots of just strangely placed things, lots of texture. Same artist, Lenore Carrington, these sort of creepy ghost guys with this very detailed background. And then there's just a lot of combination of things. Like she would have these sort of eggs with things coming off of them, little paintbrushes. Yeah, lots of weird details if you really want to look at it. Photography is also a great way to create surrealism. It just, you have to make it a little bit more convincing. But there are a few photographers out there that make really, really beautiful surrealist photography that, they're also kind of clever and fun. So juxtaposition is also a great way to create surrealism, which basically means combining two or more objects in a sort of impossible or really unusual way. This, again, is Salvador Dali. You can kind of tell by the super realistic rendering mixed with the large open background, and of course the use of the eggs. He loved to put eggs in his work. He also loved telephones and clocks. He tended to recycle a lot of objects. But we've already seen a lot of juxtaposition in each of the works that we've looked at because it tends to be a recurring theme. Juxtaposition is, of course, probably one of the main ones you're going to use in your assignment for surrealism. Transparency is also a good one. Pretty straightforward, but a really easy, quick way to make things look very odd, especially if you do this sort of cutout style that Rene Magritte loved to do. Two more examples. The one on the right is Magritte as well. And then last but not least is transformation, where you take your objects and you combine them or change them so much that they cease to function the way that they normally would visually, or they are completely unrecognizable. So this is just a kind of super weird one, but this is a really simple way of transforming a variety of objects. You can see they've used musical instruments to make the heads of pretty much all of the animals. Not so much the birds, I don't think, but it's a pretty cool painting. I love the little music note clouds. I'm also surprised by how well this works as an elephant head. And then Max Ernst would do a combination of a ton of elements, like in the one on the left, he was inspired by the texture of a lot of old Roman architecture, and then a few other forms like fabric and hands, tops, to kind of create a lot of his creatures. If you look at a lot of Max Ernst pieces, he has combined a bunch of objects together to make these sort of surreal figures, and his stuff is really, really fun. And then you can also do it by kind of using symmetry. So Salvador Dali did a lot of symmetry in his paintings. But when you first look at this, you either first see the elephants, which are in the reflection of the water, or you'll first see the swans. And then, of course, as you move back and forth, you see both. And it starts to become more and more apparent as your brain starts to kind of grab it. There's also a lot of other little teeny tiny weird surrealist bits in this. Again, this is Salvador Dali. He did a series of elephants and swan reflections as well. He tended to recycle a lot of his imagery. Nothing wrong with that. And then you have this also really cool horizon line where it just kind of melts into the sky, which makes it pretty convincing. So that's pretty much it with surrealism. So for this assignment, what you will be doing is you will be grabbing a whole bunch of photo reference from magazines, or you can do it from the internet, but it doesn't have the same spontaneity. But basically, we'll be doing this in class on Thursday if you guys come. If not, I would do it at home. But you'll be creating a collage of kind of strangely juxtaposed objects. You only have to create a collage that's 8 by 10. So basically the size of your sketchbook. And you can do it right in your sketchbook if you like. And basically you're just going to find a whole bunch of random objects, and then you are going to collage them together. So I have already done this here. One big thing that's missing here is my background. but I have at least 4 elements in here. I have this eggshell, thanks to Dali. I've got butterfly wings, I've got the dice, and I've got a weird snail coming out of it. So I just kind of, what I did first is I cut them all up, I placed them on the paper before pasting them down, and just kind of figured out which composition I would like to use. And then after that, I did paste them down so I could use it as reference. So you're going to make your collage. I want it to have at least 3 images. You don't have to have whole sections of those images. Like when I originally cut out the snail, it had a big shell where the dice was. And then obviously the butterfly had the body in the middle. So you can kind of cut apart your images even more if you just want to use little elements of it. Like the eggshells also had a big egg yolk in the middle, so I just took that out because I wanted to put this in instead. So you're going to first create your collage. Super fun. And I would think of some of the surrealist strategies. Obviously, this one is mostly transformation and juxtaposition. And then I am going to create a drawing from this, a black and white drawing for this. And it should be at least double the size. So I would say, maybe not double the size. I would say at least 12 by 18, which is about half of your big drawing sheet. And I've done it in my sketchbook, or started to. I haven't finished it. So I started doing a version of this in black and white. You can use any black and white medium that you want. You can use charcoal. You can use ink, which is what I used. I was using a variety of micron pens. If you have grayscale markers, you can use those too. I'm getting pretty easy about how you create your images towards the end of the quarter. The only thing I really insist is that it's still black and white, because I still really want us to kind of nail value by the end of the class. So yeah, basically you're making your black and white drawing of this. I changed the scale a little bit from my collage to my drawing. The other thing I want you to notice is that I have started to add a background in. I actually pulled this background from one of the surrealist artists, so you are more than welcome to do that as well. But I definitely don't want just a bunch of random objects hanging out in the middle of your paper. I want it to kind of be in a weird sort of world, which you can either create from your imagination, or I had some students who would use the background of some of these paintings and kind of just directly steal it. I've had a lot of people steal Dali's backgrounds. They're great. Yeah, I highly recommend, if you're going to steal something from Dali. De Chirico also has some pretty cool backgrounds that you could throw in there, and they're fairly simple. Or you can just use something from a photograph as well. You can actually just find a big photo and then put your collage on there as well. So really the sky's the limit. More than the sky, because it's surrealism. You can get really weird with this. I want you guys to have fun with it. I would avoid doing too many cartoony thingies in it, because I do want kind of more rendered drawings rather than just like line art. I do want to see some value in this, because it is going to help you with your final assignment in this class, which I'm going to present next week. And there will be an online video for that as well for any of you that can't make it to class. So that's pretty much it. What I would do is, if you have a whole bunch of magazines lying around, I would just flip through them, find random objects that catch your fancy, and start making your collage. Maybe sorry about that, resource guarding from dogs, so I had to break that up. So just to reiterate, I would go ahead and start making your collage, have it ready for class on Thursday so that you can make your black and white drawing. If for whatever reason you're not coming to class on Thursday, you can just do this at home. And yeah, no big deal. So I'm going to show you a larger version of this real quick, just so you have some inspiration. You've got my fun little collage, no background. And then the drawing where I started to add the background. And I'll start to put a lot more value in there as well. So you want your shadows, you want a background, you want something in the sky if you decide to include a sky. You can put it inside a room, you can put it inside a tea kettle. I mean, you can put it anywhere you want, just as long as it's inhabiting some kind of space. You can put it in space. You have a lot of options. So that is about it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I will be checking my email a lot. And I hope you guys have fun with this assignment.